This is why it's called politics. Okay? Nobody is successful in corporate on their own. Nobody. I don't care what they tell you. All right. We talked at the start of the episode. If you choose not to play politics, you want to do it yourself, great. You can get to the management, senior management level. You can keep your head down and not play politics, but it's going to be hard. You're going to have to do way more than your counterparts. And frankly, it's not going to be as rewarding because you're not going to get to work on large scale projects or highly influential because you're going to be in your silo. You have to have allies to make an impact, and you have to have allies to progress your career. This means peers. This means your leadership. This means your leader's leadership. This means your boss's peers. This is a network. All right. So you're going to map those out, know who they are, and then set intentional time with them.
Welcome back to this episode of Secrets of the Career Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden, and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know that they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtains and some tips and tricks to ultimately make you successful in your career and help you progress a little bit faster.
Politics isn't gossip or backstabbing. It's the ecosystem of influence. And today we are diving into the good, the bad, and the ugly of corporate politics, talking about how corporate politics leads to influence and how to do it while staying authentic to who you are and without losing your sense of self. So many times I have people come to me and they're like, I don't want to play the career game. I don't want to get immersed in politics. I don't want to have to network or build relationships. And what ultimately happens is if you are avoiding politics, you are going to get overlooked and you're going to be bypassed by other people who are progressing their careers more quickly within the politics game. Now, a lot of this comes down to your strategic decision. You don't have to play politics. You don't. You can make the decision in your career that you are not going to play politics and you are instead going to be heads down and do your work and stay in your role, stay in your lane, and avoid other people as much as possible. There are two main effects of this. First is you will likely never make it to director. So if director and above is not an aspiration for you, don't play politics. That's fine. Get to management, senior management, stay in that middle management layer, be able to lead your team, don't get very involved with other people, and you can still be fairly successful to that point. Once you become a director or above, a majority of your job becomes politics. And I know that gets a really bad rap. Again, we'll jump into this, but that's the reality of the situation. So the more senior you get, the more time you spend doing politics and the less time you spend doing tactical work. So the first effect is you're probably never going to make it to director level. The second effect is you are likely going to work much harder on many more things than your counterparts who do get involved in politics. And again, that can be an intentional decision. You can make the trade-off and say, hey, I don't mind doing a bunch of extra work, working really, really hard, being excellent at my job, not getting promoted for it, and staying in middle management in order to trade off with playing politics. You can make that choice. And if you're listening to this episode and you're like, but I want to keep my head down and do my job and take on more work and still get to the CEO level, it's not going to happen. I hate to be the person to burst your bubble. I do, okay? I want to root for you and be like, no, good hard work pays off. At some point in your career, your job becomes politics. So I'm going to define what politics means to set the stage for this, because I think it gets a bad rep. Lots of people talk about why politics in corporate is bad and evil and all the negatives. But the reality is politics are a facet of all of our lives. So let's define it. So politics is navigating interpersonal conflict. How do you disagree with people that you work with, and how do you do it in an effective way? Now, the bad and ugly side of interpersonal conflict is navigating scope stealing, is navigating being thrown under the bus for things that you did or didn't do. It also includes things like being shut out of meetings or shut out of projects because you disagreed with somebody who is highly influential in that sphere, right? Navigating interpersonal conflict can manifest in bad ways, right? Now, I would argue those are generally the result of somebody who doesn't know how to do interpersonal conflict management very well and or a toxic company culture, right? So for the sake of this episode, we are not going to talk about toxic company culture. All right, I've done plenty of episodes on it. You can go listen to those. I'll tag them in the show notes. But the reality is that if you work in a decent company, you need to be able to navigate interpersonal conflict, and you need to be able to do that successfully by yourself. Okay, so that's the first facet of politics, is navigating interpersonal conflict. The second aspect of politics is collaboration. And collaboration requires a few things. It requires being able to work with other people in a successful way, which again goes back to interpersonal conflict management. It also requires knowing who you should be collaborating with, which requires a network, it requires relationships, it requires investing in high-level influencers. It requires more than just going to a meeting that has lots of different teams on it and doing the meeting, okay? It includes successful networking. And the last piece of collaboration is it requires your ability to understand what other people want. In order to collaborate successfully, you have to be able to get out of your own way and your own priorities and your own tunnel vision for your job and understand what's important to your boss, what's important to your boss's boss, what's important to that head of finance, what's important to that head of operations, so that you can work with them effectively. So collaboration is the second big tier of politics, all right? And the last big tier of politics is your reputation. And this is why these three things get talked about so much, right? When you scroll social media, or you're looking at a coach's content, or you're looking at LinkedIn, or you're looking at my content, frankly, we talk about the same three things. We talk about communication, we talk about networking, and we talk about building your personal brand. And it's because these are the aspects of politics. So this last piece, your personal brand, your reputation, is important, because if you get to the point where you have a negative reputation, it is like digging yourself out of a hole in the ground. It is going to be slow going. It is going to take a lot of time. Odds are your company is going to lose patience with you before you ever repair your reputation, which is why it's so important to intentionally build the right rep and to invest in that. And then again, to have those relationships that you can collaborate with successfully and be able to navigate the interpersonal conflict that comes with issues. Otherwise, you will end up with a bad reputation. So when people talk about politics, what makes it bad is that, oh, I argued with a peer of mine over XYZ, or, oh, Steve made a play to steal some of my scope and some of my team, or so-and-so backstabbed me in a meeting that I wasn't in and talked about why I wasn't good at my job, right? And there are things you can do to prevent every single one of those circumstances if you are playing politics successfully. But again, you have to make that choice. So I'm assuming if you're still with me at this point in the episode, you have made the choice that you are going to learn to play politics, you're going to understand the politics of influence, and you want to learn how to win without actually losing yourself in the game. You want to stay authentic to who you are, but you still want to get better at these things so you can continue to progress your career. Great. Let's do it. 3 things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about identifying power centers. We're going to talk about mapping allies, rivals, and decision makers, also known as your influencers. And we're going to talk about the hidden rules of timing. Okay, these are really important when it comes to establishing your success on the game board that is corporate politics, right? In my book, Secrets of the Career Game, we talk about the chessboard that is work. We talk about the different moves and counter moves that are made. Today, we're going to break down some of those. So first, we're going to start with identifying power centers. In your company, there are people who are more influential than other people, right? You can say that's not fair. You can say you don't know how to identify them. We're going to talk about that today. But in the end, somebody you work with is more influential than somebody else. We make the mistake oftentimes of assuming our boss is the most influential person we work with. They're probably not. There are situations where they are. I work in a company where my boss is a highly influential individual, right? But it's not always that way. I've also worked for bosses who held little to no influence. Okay, so you need to identify the power centers in your company. And power centers can be certain departments under certain leaders. I've worked in companies where IA, for example, was really, really powerful. Or I've worked in areas where IR was really, really powerful. Or I've worked for companies where strategy was a really important team, or operations, or IT. So understand first which divisions of your company hold a lot of power and influence, right? If you sit within the area that holds a lot of power and influence, then you need to understand who are the largest voices within your vertical that are contributing to that level of influence. So this might be a couple of senior leaders, right, who are very outspoken, very influential. This could be somebody who holds approval or denial for projects. This could be somebody who's just really well liked. Okay. I have worked with people, give a quick example. I worked in an organization once where there was a very influential team. And the most influential person in that team was not the senior director who led the team. It was a senior analyst. Okay, so the way that this company's seniority went was analyst, senior analyst, manager, senior manager, VP, senior director. Okay, it was not senior director, it was not the VP. The person who held the most influence was a senior analyst. They had a really good rapport with their senior director. They'd made a lot of really good relationships side to side. They understood the objectives of the company. And when that individual interjected themselves into anything, their voice was going to be the one that was successful, right? So understanding your power center does not come down to seniority. It comes down to who has the most influence. Who, when they talk, everybody else gets quiet. Who is that person, right? Now, there are negative centers of power, right? There might be somebody that everybody's terrified of that you don't want to get on their bad side. We're going to talk about this more in the next one. But understand where those power centers live, what parts of your organization, and which individuals. Then within that, you're going to map your allies, your rivals, and your decision makers. Now, I would argue you shouldn't have any rivals. You should not ever put yourself in a position where you are in competition with somebody else directly. Now, other people may choose to put themselves in a position where they are in competition with you, all right? In which case we want to be aware of them, which is why rivals is part of this conversation. But if you are good at interpersonal conflict management, collaboration, and handling your reputation, you have no need to be in competition with a peer or with somebody else in your org. If they choose to make you a rival, if they are undermining you, if they are stealing credit for your work, if they are bad-mouthing you, if they are trying to steal attention from your boss, if they come outright and say, I don't like you and I'm in competition with you, any of the above situations, these are the individuals with whom we must CYA. Cover your assets. All right. This means if you have a one-on-one meeting with them, you are sending a recap in writing after. This means that if they are talking to you about something or make a request, you are documenting it physically in an email after. This means that in meetings with group settings, we are taking meeting notes. You have to be careful with individuals who believe they are in competition with you. And you have to be getting ahead of it. CYA involves documentation and proactivity. If there's an individual that you're interacting with who you know thinks they're in competition with you, they go out of your way to make your life difficult, you need to be giving proactive updates to your leadership of what's going on before they have a chance to get to them. So example of this, you're working with Susie, and Susie thinks she's in competition with you, and you are working on delivering a spreadsheet to leadership, okay? And you meet with Susie, and Susie talks about the 52 million reasons why she cannot help with the spreadsheet. She's too busy. She has XYZ going on. Nobody asked her opinion. She wasn't given prioritization. Your boss didn't send her whatever she needed. She gives you a million reasons why she can't do the project. You talk through it, and she says she's going to get you something by Friday. You're going to CYA that in an email, written documentation. And proactively to your boss, you're going to say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I met with Susie this week on the spreadsheet. She seems to have some hesitation about turning it around, but she did tell me she'd be able to get me a piece of it by Friday. I'll keep you posted if I have any issues. You are proactively informing your boss of what's going on before it falls apart. Don't wait until Susie calls her boss crying and talks about how horrible you are to then go to your boss and be like, but that's not fair. I met with Susie on Tuesday and she said she was going to be proactive. If you know this person is a risk, communicate with your leadership ahead of needing them. Don't wait till stuff is on fire. It's a huge mistake people make because they think, oh, I can handle it myself. I don't want to bother my boss with that. I don't want to burden them. So they're not proactive. Then something does blow up and their boss is like, what'd you do wrong? And you're like, I didn't do anything wrong. It's not my fault. But it's too late to prove that it's not your fault. So be proactive. All right, so that's rivals. You also want to map out your allies and your decision makers. So when we were talking about centers of power, we talked about the people who are very influential. Those are going to be your decision makers. You're going to want to put them in your influencer list. I have a whole other episode on how to create your influencer list. It's something that I do in my coaching. It's also documented in my book, Secrets of the Career Game. So if you want more tactical about how to do that, check one of those resources out. I don't want to take more time today, but those go in your influencer list. And then you're going to mark which ones are your allies already or need to become your allies. Your goal is to have such a robust network around you that even if your rival tries everything they can to create issues for you at work, you are protected through your alliances, right? This is why it's called politics. Okay? Nobody is successful in corporate on their own. Nobody. I don't care what they tell you. All right. We talked at the start of the episode. If you choose not to play politics, you want to do it yourself, great. You can get to the management, senior management level. You can keep your head down and not play politics, but it's going to be hard. You're going to have to do way more than your counterparts. And frankly, it's not going to be as rewarding because you're not going to get to work on large scale projects or highly influential because you're going to be in your silo. You have to have allies to make an impact, and you have to have allies to progress your career. This means peers. This means your leadership. This means your leader's leadership. This means your boss's peers. This is a network. All right. So you're going to map those out, know who they are, and then set intentional time with them. I often talk about meeting with your allies, your decision makers once a quarter, and I still stand by that. But something came up in my coaching recently that I want to touch on that I think is really, really key. When you are setting up time to meet with these people every quarter, I will generally not set a recurring invite. What you want to do is reach out and say, hey, I'd love to chat with you. I could use your help on this particular issue, get some advice. You're going to use that time to ask them to impart their knowledge on you. What are they good at? Are they good at politics? Are they good at communication? Are they good at collaboration? Are they good at influence? Are they good at navigating, difficulty? What is it that they're good at that they can give you some advice on? And then you want to set a reminder for yourself 3 months from now to reach back out again. But don't set a recurring invite. A lot of people get kind of overwhelmed by that concept of like, oh, she wants to meet all the time. What are we going to talk about? There are exceptions to that with people you work with really, really often. You can go ahead and set those. But if this is somebody who is truly a mentorship only, who we don't have much interaction with, we want it to feel more organic, even if on our side it's structured. So keep that in mind. Bonus tip. All right. And the last one is hidden rules of timing. So when to push back versus when to hold back. So I would say that everybody who's ever managed me or worked with me would say that I am incredibly opinionated. I think that's probably a fair assessment. They would say I'm opinionated. I'm not afraid to share my opinion. I'm not afraid to share my thoughts. I'm not afraid to argue my position. But there is a time and a place, and there is a way and a how. All right. Time and the place comes down to a few things. One, you should be doing Nemawashi, which is you should be having conversations in the hallways before you ever get to the boardroom. If you are pitching something new, if you are trying to get buy-in for a decision, if you're trying to get a project off the ground, do not wait and prepare this beautiful strategic deck and then take it to a group of 40 people to pitch it for the first time. You will fail. Okay. You need to be having conversations with all those major decision makers and all those allies ahead of time so that by the time you get into that big meeting, the pushback is relatively minimal. Right? Do yourself a favor. Don't go in blind and see if everybody argues with you. That's dangerous, right? Lay the groundwork, plant seeds, give them pre-reads, ask their opinion, and then present. So that's the first piece with when to push, when to hold back, is do your pushing ahead of time. Don't wait for the giant, very public meeting to do your pushing. Not strategic. Second thing is you can always share your opinion in the right way, which we'll talk about the how and the why later. But you don't want to argue against something that has already been decided on by senior leadership. Now, I'm going to get hate for this. I just know it. I see my comments blowing up. There were times in my career where I would have argued until I was blue in the face that leadership was making the wrong decision. And I would have had all the data points to back it up. And I would have had all the examples, and I would have felt so righteously justified for my position, even if it ruffled feathers. And what I've come to learn over the course of my career and through coaching my clients is If the decision has already been made, your job is to voice your concerns and then go do it. You want to get your concerns on the record. You want to share, hey, I have some concerns about this working in XYZ situation, but happy to go get it figured out. And then you want to execute it to the best of your ability, right? If it doesn't work and you were right, we don't want to come back and be like, see, I told you so. But we can say, hey, I had mentioned a concern about it working in XYZ situation. We're starting to see that come to fruition. Do you have any ideas about how I could overcome that? Or is there anyone who can work with me to come up with some creative solutions? Right? There are ways to make your voice heard without undermining the authority of your leadership. In the end, if it is a truly already made decision set in stone, they're not going to change their mind anyways. But it will hurt your reputation to be the person who argues too long. Voice your concern, move on. Amazon calls this disagree and commit. Okay. The second thing is when you push back, there is a lot about how you do it. So if you noticed in the example I just gave, when I'm voicing an issue, I'm not saying, no, that's dumb, that's not going to work. I would have said that, okay? 15 years ago, I probably almost certainly said that. So if you worked with me 10, 15 years ago, I apologize, okay? But the way that you share your concerns is, hey, I can understand why this seems like a good idea. 99% of the time, we can understand why we think something is right. We can understand why somebody has chosen a certain path or a certain project. Even if we don't agree with it, we know why their brain worked that way, right? Most of the time. Acknowledge that. Acknowledge what they have done. Acknowledge why it is important. Acknowledge why you can agree with their perspective. And then state, hey, but I have some concerns of it working in this situation or working at scale or us having enough time to roll this out. Share your concern. It's probably valid, but acknowledge them first, then share that concern. One of the ways I love to share my concerns is in a question. And this, I think, gets overused and it becomes really obnoxious. Don't do that. And then say you learned it from me. I'm watching you. Don't do that. Okay. If you're going to ask a question, it's something like, hey, I can see why you think this is going to work. I have a concern about it working in this situation. Did we already think through that? Maybe they did. Maybe they already have a fix in place. Maybe they've already bought a system that's going to do that. Maybe they've already onboarded resources or gotten budgetary approval for resources. Maybe they can solve your problem. Ask. Don't just say it's not going to work. We don't have enough people. Because then if they go, well, we already have approval to hire 5 people, then you look dumb, right? You didn't ask enough qualified questions, right? When you have concerns, ask questions first. If there's not a satisfying answer, then of course say, hey, I can see that that's the solution we're going for. I'm happy to roll with it. I just want to be on record. I have a little bit of a concern about this executing, but we'll get to that when we get there, right? Get it on record, ask your question, and then move on. The other way that we want to deliver our feedback is we want to deliver it when possible in the smallest group possible. Reason for this is nobody likes to be publicly embarrassed. Nobody. I don't like to be publicly embarrassed. You're listening to this and you don't like to be publicly embarrassed. Let's be honest, okay? So when you can give feedback in one-on-one situations or in smaller groups, it is always more appropriate. Now, I think it gets some hate on the internet that like, hey, let's take this offline. People use it too much. I agree. People also use it to handle interpersonal conflict, which we talked about at the beginning. But when you are thinking about a heavy disagreement, it is better where you can, if you can't handle it with a question in the real room, to handle it one-on-one. That could be a ping. Most companies at this point have Teams or chat or some type of something running in the background where you could be like, hey, Susie, I'm a little concerned about it working here. Have we thought about that? Like, I don't know that this solution is going to fix that, right? Address it one-on-one where you can. People are more likely to be constructive and collaborative when they're not in the hot seat in front of 40 people. I am, for sure. But making sure that you're not putting somebody on blast publicly, right? There have been situations where I've rephrased something in a public setting in order to elicit a certain reaction. So for example, we want to eliminate a line in a financial report, and rather than saying like, we definitely can't eliminate that line, I call the line something different. Just to be clear, the line we want to eliminate is all of our fixed costs, and we're comfortable with that. And if they say yes, like, great, I'm happy to do that. Doesn't make sense to me, but that's not my problem, right? So sometimes we can rephrase things in a public setting to get buy-in, but we want to make sure that we're really careful especially if we're really disagreeing with somebody and we know we're not going to get to a mutual decision that's beneficial for both parties, we want to take that offline. Okay. So you understand the three pieces of politics. You've learned to identify your power centers. You've mapped out your allies, your rivals, your decision makers, and you've worked on some of your timing and some of your delivery methods. Then we need to make sure we maintain our integrity, right? We don't want to influence with manipulation. That's not cool. We don't want to back people into a corner. A lot of the things I've described thus far are just ways to do the things we're already doing that are a little bit easier to digest. But nothing is going to get better at work. Nothing is going to get done. Your politics are not going to improve if you do not have trust. And trust happens two ways. One, time, and two, following through. That is it. People overcomplicate trust and they come up with these 72-step processes to build trust with your coworkers. Lies. Two things. Time, following through. That's it. Time goes back to networking. Are you spending time with the people you work with? Right? A lot of us are in remote work sessions now. That requires more intentionality. If you are in the office, you may have a more organic way of spending time with people. But the more time you spend one-on-one with somebody, the more you're going to have trust with them, especially if you don't abuse that, right? We've talked about rivals and CYAing already. But in a normal situation, if you work with Scott and Scott's great, maybe you guys butt heads some in meetings, but you meet in these one-on-ones, you get to know each other, you get to talk about things offline without the pressure of the group. In these one-on-one settings, you know each other better. You're going to build trust faster. Full stop. Quick bonus point here. When people are dealing with interpersonal conflict, most people's first reaction is like, oop, they don't like me. I'm just not going to meet with them anymore. That is the worst thing you can do. The best thing for interpersonal conflict is to meet one-on-one with that person. Now, they may prove to you in that one-on-one that that's a one-time thing. Okay. They may be awful, but you have a much higher probability of fixing friction and improving a relationship if you spend one-on-one time. Most of my clients, I would say 85-90% of the time, will go into a one-on-one with somebody they dislike and come out liking them. It's very common. So spend that one-on-one time. Second way we build trust capital is we follow through with what we say we're going to do or not do. If in a one-on-one you commit to delivering something on Friday, do it. And if you can't do it, send a note ahead of Friday and say, hey, I'm behind because of XYZ. Is Monday cool? Right? Follow through with what you say you're going to do. The biggest thing that breaks trust is when you are asked to do something, you say you will and you do not do it. This applies to managers. This applies to people being managed. This applies to coworkers. This applies when interacting with senior leaders. Do not overcommit yourself. I would almost rather you say, hey, I can't get to this right now. I can pick it up in 3 weeks than commit to it now and not deliver because you're going to break that trust. Right? Staying authentic to who you are requires having trust with people because people are much more likely to forgive personality nuance, delivery nuance, collaboration difficulties if they know, like, and trust you as a person. It's going to make work easier. So really build that trust capital. Second thing is you want to advocate for others. Yeah. Again, two big ways we do this that we'll talk about and then we'll wrap. First is when you are managing a team, your job, in my opinion, as a boss, is to advocate for the people who work for you. Full stop. This means protecting them from backlash when they make mistakes. This means running interference so that they don't get in front of senior leaders to make a bunch of mistakes before they're ready. And this means advocating for them behind closed doors for promotions, progression, and scope opportunities. If you are not doing those three things as a boss, you are a bad boss. Harsh but true. You must advocate for your people. Now, I'm not a huge fan of advocacy. We could get into that. I think I did an episode on this, but it's been a very long time. But I feel more comfortable empowering my team with the resources, the tools, the coaching that they need so that by the time I go to advocate for them, everyone's like, oh yeah, they're great. Duh. Right? I like to give them the tools they need ahead of time, right? Versus advocate for them on the back end. But I went into a meeting not even 2 months ago to advocate for one of my team members to get a promotion. And I walked into the meeting and said, hey, this is the individual we're going to be discussing. Here's how they compare to their peer set. This is some of the things they delivered. And I was cut off by a senior leader who said, yeah, no brainer. We should definitely promote them. Anybody have any objections? Because they had already put themselves in a good position and I came in willing to advocate. Okay? Must advocate for your team. The other way that we advocate is giving credit. I If you're watching this on YouTube, you can like feel my frustration. This is my biggest corporate pet peeve. Biggest corporate pet peeve is not giving people who help you credit for helping you. Oh, guys. See, this is one of the reasons that like I get so worked up at work, right? And if you've watched me for a while, I talk a lot about keeping emotional distance, keeping your balance at work, not being reactive. These are all things that I've had to build over years because my natural state is reactive. I'm so frustrated when people do this, okay? You should be giving other people credit. It will not lessen what you have delivered. And I don't understand people who steal credit or who refuse to give credit or who are like, but I did most of the hard work. Great. Who cares? You should be giving credit. It is a joke with my executive team that when I go to present something, I always give shout outs. Always. I will be in front of the board and I will be like, I quickly like to mention so and so on my team who did a great job pulling together the data that we're going to discuss today. That person likely isn't even in that call, but I'm going to say that they did the work because they did. Same thing if somebody on another team helped me. If I needed them to get accesses, to pull data, to support my position, to give me training, to train my team, I'm going to say, I'm so thankful for so and so for helping make this possible. They were a huge help during this process. Give credit. It doesn't lessen that you did your job. I will never understand that, especially bosses who go into meetings and they don't give credit to the person on their team who did the work. Oh, it's the biggest pet peeve. And there are times I have done presentations where it is not appropriate for me to bring the individual from my team into that meeting, right? Maybe it's a board meeting, maybe it's something that has a lot of IR implications, and it may not be appropriate for that person to sit in, even just to watch. However, I'm still going to mention their name that they did that work. That name may mean nothing to the people in that room. But if it happens 4, 5, 7, 10 times, that name starts to mean something. And then when I put that individual up for promotion, it's going to be so much easier for me as a boss. So give your team credit, give your coworkers credit. It is not going to lessen your impact. If anything, it's going to show that you're a great leader. Now, there are companies that culture goes contrary to this. I know it. I know it. We've all worked for that company where this would be like a no-no to say, Steve on my team pulled this analysis together. I've been there. Okay. Do it anyways. If you are a good person and a good boss and it is authentic to you to share credit, do it. Do it. It does not undermine your credibility in any way. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. So we talked through today the 3 parts of politics: interpersonal conflict management, collaboration, reputation. We talked about the 3 pieces on your game board that are going to help you have stronger influence, which is identifying power centers, mapping your allies, rivals, and decision makers, and then following the hidden rules of timing. And then 2 ways to stay authentic to who you are and build integrity with your relationships, which is building that trust capital and advocating for others. If you do these things, your life in politics will get easier. Politics is not a bad thing. It is used to do bad things. People leverage the system in bad ways, but there are ways to make it work for you and ultimately find more success as a result. I want you to take away from this episode 1 question and be able to answer it before next week's podcast. Do you understand the map of influence in your company? Do you know who has influence? What teams, what people, what projects? Who are they? What are they doing? If you can answer that question, building your capabilities through your company is going to be so much easier. Hopefully you guys loved today's episode. If you did, make sure you leave us 5 stars. Any questions that you have for me, pop in the comments below. Otherwise, we will be back next week with another great episode.